There is a particular kind of madness that the ancient mystics wrote about in languages that no longer have living speakers, a madness so specific and so holy that ordinary physicians of the mind have no name for it in their clinical lexicons. It is not the madness of delusion, not the madness of paranoia, not the madness of a mind collapsing under the weight of trauma or chemical imbalance. It is the madness of a person who has loved someone deeply, who has built an entire interior world around the architecture of that beloved's face and voice and rhythm, only to discover that the person they were building around was never a fixed point to begin with. It is the madness of a cartographer who realizes, mid-voyage, that the continent they have been mapping is slowly, inexplicably, and magnificently rising out of the water, becoming something grander and more mountainous than any flat projection of land could ever have suggested. Your soulmate is experiencing precisely this kind of madness right now. They are pacing the confines of their earthly mind like a prisoner who has memorized every crack in the cell wall, every variation in the light that comes through the small, high window, every sound the hinges make at predictable hours, only to walk past that window one ordinary afternoon, and see not the familiar courtyard below, but the boundless, terrifying, impossibly beautiful expanse of an ocean that was never supposed to be there. They are going mad, not because something has gone wrong, but because something has gone more right than their human nervous system knows how to process. You must sit with the full weight of this truth before you can understand what is being asked of you in this moment. Your soulmate did not fall in love with a lie. They fell in love with a version of you that was real and true and wholly present at the time, but which was also incomplete in the way that a seed is incomplete when held in a palm, beautiful and full of potential, but not yet expressing its own deepest truth. They fell in love with the quieter frequencies of your being, the ones you had learned over a lifetime to broadcast most loudly, because those were the frequencies the world around you rewarded. The gentleness, the accommodation, the softness of someone who has trained themselves to never take up too much space. The careful, practiced habit of making yourself small enough to fit through the narrow doorways of other people's comfort. They built their love on this foundation, and their love was genuine, and their love was good, and none of that is being erased or diminished by what is happening now. But the foundation they chose was not the bedrock of who you actually are. It was the surface, the outermost layer, the human costume you had assembled across decades of learning to survive in a world that often punishes brightness with hostility and rewards dimness with acceptance. And now the costume is dissolving. Now the outermost layer is peeling away in the heat of your becoming, and what is being revealed underneath is something so luminous and so vast that the person who fell in love with the costume is standing before you, with their hands outstretched, and their eyes wide, and their mind breaking gently, painfully, irreversibly open. There is something you need to understand about the mechanics of a soulmate connection that most human love stories get entirely wrong. Popular culture has told you that a soulmate is someone who fits perfectly against you, like a missing puzzle piece, someone whose edges match your edges in such a comfortable and frictionless way that being together feels like finally arriving at a place of permanent rest. This is a beautiful idea, and it contains a small kernel of truth, but it is ultimately a story designed to keep both souls comfortable rather than catalyzed. The real mechanics of a soulmate connection are far more turbulent and far more purposeful than this. A soulmate is not someone who was sent to confirm you in your current form. A soulmate is someone whose soul signed a contract with your soul, before either of you had bodies, before either of you had names or faces or histories or wounds, and the terms of that contract were never about comfort. The terms of that contract were about transformation. The terms were about mutual evolution, about the kind of love that refuses to let either party stay small, about the sacred and terrifying commitment to see each other through every layer of becoming, rather than choosing to preserve only the most familiar and manageable version of the beloved. Your soulmate agreed to this contract in full, before they were born into this body, before they developed the ego and the fear and the deep human need for predictability that are now making them go quietly, magnificently mad. They agreed to be present for the full unfolding of who you are. Their current madness is simply the human part of them, catching up to the soul part of them, the part that already knows what is happening and why, and already recognizes it as sacred. The shifting of your appearance in the light is not metaphor, or rather, it is simultaneously metaphor and literal truth, which is always the way the universe communicates when it is transmitting something important. When you step into the full light of your aligned purpose, when you allow the frequency of your genuine spiritual power to move through your body without filtering or dampening it, your physical presence changes in ways that are perceptible to those who are sensitive enough, or close enough, or loving enough to notice. The skin does something different, the eyes hold a different quality of attention. The spine arranges itself according to a different kind of authority. Not the performed authority of someone who has been told to stand up straight, but the natural authority of a being who has remembered, somewhere in the marrow, that they belong to something ancient and sovereign and vast. The way you occupy a room shifts, the silence around you has a different texture. The quality of attention you receive from strangers, passing on the street subtly alters. None of this is vanity, and none of this is performance, and it is not something you are doing consciously or deliberately. It is simply what happens when the soul stops apologizing for its own radiance and allows that radiance to move through the body unimpeded. The people who knew the more contained version of you notice this shift most acutely, because they have the most detailed reference point for comparison, and of all the people who know you, your soulmate knows you most intimately, which means they are receiving the full voltage of the contrast between who you were and who you are becoming, with nothing to buffer the shock. Consider the long architecture of the journey that brought you to this moment. You did not arrive at your current level of brightness quickly or easily. There were years, perhaps decades, of what can only be described as interior excavation, a slow and often agonizing process of digging through the accumulated rubble of other people's projections, old wounds that calcified into limiting beliefs, grief that had never been allowed to move through you, and so had instead settled into the soft tissues of your body, and the deep grooves of your thinking. There were nights so dark that the darkness felt like a permanent condition, rather than a passing weather pattern. Nights when the idea of a sovereign self, a purposeful existence, a genuine spiritual power, waiting beneath all the rubble, seemed like ketub children to help them sleep. You endured those nights. You moved through them without a map, guided only by some deep, wordless instinct that insisted, even in the worst moments, that there was something worth excavating. You endured the loneliness of the process, Because real interior transformation is a largely solitary endeavor. Something that can be witnessed and supported by others, but never actually shared or distributed, never made lighter by having someone else carry half the weight. You endured the confusion of watching parts of yourself that you had grown attached to dissolving in the process, old identities, old coping mechanisms, old stories about who you were and what you deserved, and what was possible for someone like you, all of it slowly, painfully, necessarily releasing its grip. You survived all of this. You came through the long dark corridor and stepped out into a quality of light that you had only previously imagined, and now you are being asked to stand fully in that light, to refuse to step back into the corridor, simply because the brightness of where you are is temporarily overwhelming to someone you love deeply. This is not cruelty. This is the completion of the work you have already done. To step back now would be to undo years of sacred excavation with a single fear-motivated gesture of retreat. The angels are watching this moment with a particular quality of attention that is different from their ordinary observation of human affairs. There is a reverence in it, a kind of held breath, because they understand better than anyone what it costs a soul to maintain its full brightness in the face of another's confusion or pain. The empathetic heart which yours is, has a powerful and beautiful, and sometimes treacherous instinct, to relieve the suffering of those it loves. This instinct is one of your greatest gifts and simultaneously one of the primary mechanisms by which your light has historically been dimmed. You feel your soulmate's vertigo as though it were your own. You feel the disorientation of their love bumping up against the expanding reality of who you are, and every cell of your empathetic body wants to make it stop, wants to smooth the rough edge of their discomfort, wants to offer them the familiar mask, the old costume, the quieter frequencies they already know how to receive. The temptation to shrink is not a sign of weakness, it is a sign of how deeply you love. But heaven, which sees the full arc of this story, and not only the difficult middle chapter you are currently living, is asking you to recognize that true love and capitulation to another's fear are not the same thing. No matter how much the empathetic heart tries to convince you otherwise, true love, the kind that actually serves another soul, holds its own light steady and trusts that the beloved has everything they need to expand enough to receive it. Capitulation disguises itself as love, but it is actually a form of spiritual abandonment, both of yourself, and ultimately, of the person you are trying to protect, from the discomfort of their own growth. Your soulmate's madness has a specific shape that you will recognize if you look at it carefully. It is the shape of a person trying to simultaneously hold two irreconcilable truths. On one side, there is the truth of their intimate knowledge of you, the accumulated texture of shared mornings, and shared silences and shared grief, the 10,000 small moments of ordinary human love, that form the body of a real relationship. They know the sound of your breathing in sleep. They know the particular way you hold a cup. They know the small specific language that develops between people who have loved each other across time, the private shorthand, the references that would mean nothing to anyone outside the relationship, the quiet fluency of a long and genuine intimacy. This knowledge is real, and it is precious, and it is not invalidated by what is happening. But on the other side of the irreconcilable gap is what they see, when you step into the light of your own power, a being who seems to be standing in a different quality of gravity, a presence that the intimate knowledge they have accumulated somehow fails to fully capture or contain. They look at you and the familiar details are all there. The same eyes, the same hands, the same voice, and yet something has been added that rearranges all the familiar details into a composition they don't entirely recognize. It is like looking at a painting you have loved for years, and suddenly noticing that there is an entire background you never registered before, a vast landscape behind the figure you were focused on, stretching all the way to a horizon you never knew existed. They cannot reconcile these two truths, and the attempt to reconcile them is what is generating the madness. The reconciliation they are reaching for requires them to expand their own container, to become someone capable of holding a more complex and more luminous version of the love they have been given. This expansion is what the madness is preparing them for. There is a teaching in the oldest wisdom traditions about the nature of divine light and its effect on human consciousness, and it goes something like this. The eyes of the ordinary mind are not built to receive the full brightness of the divine directly. Too much too fast, and the ordinary mind does not simply adjust its fragments, it searches desperately for the familiar dark corners, where it knows how to locate itself. It reaches back toward the shapes it already knows. But here is the part of the teaching that gets less attention. This fragmentation, this desperate reaching backward, is not a failure of the process. It is the process. The eye must be temporarily blinded in order to begin developing the capacity for a new kind of seeing. The mind must experience the vertigo of not knowing in order to release the grip of false certainty. The beloved must lose their fixed image of you in order to discover the deeper, truer, more magnificent image that was always underneath. Your soulmate is in the middle of this necessary temporary blindness right now. They are not broken. They are being rebuilt. The madness is the demolition phase, chaotic and dusty and disorienting in the way that all demolition is, but preceding something new, and more structurally sound, and more beautiful than what was there before. Let us speak honestly about the power dynamic that is shifting in the field between you. For a long time, the balance of the relationship may have leaned in a particular direction, one that kept you slightly smaller and them slightly more stable in their sense of knowing you. This is not necessarily anyone's fault. Relationships find their equilibrium based on the energetic realities of both people at any given time, and if you were still in the process of excavating your own brightness, it made sense that the relationship would organize itself around the steadier, more legible version of you that was available during that time. But the equilibrium has shifted now, not because you have seized power, or because you have chosen to dominate, or because you have any desire to make your soulmate feel diminished. The equilibrium has shifted because you have changed, genuinely, at the level of the soul, and that kind of change always reorganizes the energetic field of every relationship you inhabit. You are standing taller in the frequency of your own truth, and this has altered the gravitational field between you. What once felt like complementary balance now feels, to your soulmate, like standing on a slope that keeps getting steeper. This is uncomfortable for them, and it is also necessary, because the old equilibrium was not actually serving either of you as fully as it could. The new equilibrium, the one that the universe is in the process of establishing, will be built on a truer and more solid foundation, one in which both of you are standing in the fullness of your respective power, rather than one of you being brighter, and the other being more stable, and the two of you arranging yourselves around that complementarity. but getting to the new equilibrium requires passing through the instability of transition, and transition always feels like chaos to the ones living inside it. Think about what it means to be a multifaceted crystal in the light. A crystal does not choose how many colors it reflects. A crystal does not decide in advance which face to turn toward the light on any given morning. A crystal simply is what it is, a structure of almost mathematical complexity and beauty, and the light does with it what light does, which is to reveal through it a range and a radiance that plain surfaces could never generate. Every face of the crystal produces a different refraction. Every angle of the light produces a different display. The crystal is always itself, always the same crystalline structure, but it is never only one thing in the light, never reducible to a single color or a single direction of brightness. You are this crystal. Your soulmate fell in love with one particular refraction of your light, the angle they first encountered, the colors that were visible from where they were standing, when the love first began. They built their love around that particular display of color, and called it you, and it was you, as much as any single refraction is the truth of the crystal. But now you have turned, or the light has shifted, or both, and they are seeing refractions they have never seen before. Colors they did not know were inside you, depths and complexities of brightness that the original angle of their love simply didn't reveal. This is not you becoming someone different, this is you becoming more fully visible. The madness is the gap between the beautiful partial thing they thought they knew completely, and the beautiful, complete thing they are only now beginning to discover. They have barely begun to know. There is a particular grief, folded inside their madness, that deserves your compassion. Even as you refuse to let that compassion pull you backward, they are grieving a version of you that they loved, and that is no longer the primary version on offer. That grief is legitimate. That grief is real. The version of you that they are losing was a real person, fully inhabiting their experiences and their love and their days, and the loss of the specific shape of that person, even when the loss is precipitated by something expansive and beautiful, rather than something tragic, is still a loss. You can hold space for that grief, without internalizing the responsibility for fixing it. You can love them in their mourning, without making the mourning your reason to return to a smaller self. The most loving thing you can do in this moment is to be exactly who you are, and to allow them to grieve who you were, because the grief is the doorway they need to walk through in order to reach the love that is waiting on the other side of the expansion. If you help them avoid the grief by shrinking back to the familiar version, you are denying them the doorway. You are keeping them locked in a room they need to leave. The kindest action is also the most difficult one, which is to stay large, to stay bright, to stay in the fullness of what you are becoming, and to trust that their grief will move through them, and give way to something that is not grief at all, but rather a profound and awe-filled recognition of what they are standing in the presence of. You have spent lifetimes learning to dim yourself for the comfort of others. This is not an exaggeration, and it is not self-aggrandizement. It is a soul-level pattern that has played out across incarnations in different bodies and different circumstances, but with the same essential dynamic at its core. Your light encounters the fear of another, and your love for that other, combined with your own internalized fear of what brightness costs, leads you to turn down your own frequency. You have done this so many times and so automatically that it stopped feeling like a choice, and started feeling like simply the shape of who you are. The dimness started to feel like identity, the mask started to feel like a face. And then in this lifetime something happened, a series of somethings, a long sequence of initiatory experiences, that slowly and sometimes brutally stripped away your willingness to continue making that trade. The dark nights of the soul were not punishments, they were interventions. They were the universe, refusing to allow you to keep choosing the comfort of smallness over the terrifying freedom of your own truth. Every time you lost something you thought you needed, and discovered you were still standing, every time you were forced to sit alone with the most difficult parts of yourself, and found that the most difficult parts were also somehow the most genuine parts. Every time the mask cracked, and you had to feel the naked air on the real face beneath it, the universe was doing the slow and patient work of preparing you for exactly this moment, the moment when stepping back into dimness would no longer be possible without consciously, actively choosing a kind of soul-level self-betrayal. You are at that moment now. The question is not whether you will step into the light. You have already stepped. The question is whether you will stay. Staying in the light does not mean being insensitive to your soulmate's experience. It does not mean performing your brightness at them in a way that is aggressive or oblivious to what they are moving through. True spiritual power is never performative, never aggressive, never wielded as a weapon or a demonstration. True spiritual power is simply a quality of presence, a willingness to be entirely in your own skin without apology and without aggression, a groundedness in your own frequency, that does not require validation from outside, and does not collapse in the face of another's confusion. You can be in this power, and be tender simultaneously. You can stand fully in the light of who you are, and still reach toward your soulmate with the most genuine love you have. You can be magnificent and also be soft. You can be sovereign and also be gentle. These are not contradictions, they are the natural qualities of a soul that has genuinely integrated its own power, rather than merely performing power, as a response to having been small for too long. Genuine power is always accompanied by genuine compassion, because a soul that truly understands its own magnitude also understands the magnitude of every other soul it encounters, and that understanding makes cruelty or arrogance, not just wrong, but literally impossible. So be tender with your soulmate's madness, even as you refuse to cure it by shrinking yourself. Let your love be present and warm and real, even as your light remains undimmed. This is the most difficult and most sacred balance of the entire spiritual journey, to be both fully yourself and fully loving at the same time, to discover that those two things are not in competition, but are in fact the same thing, expressed through the same actions. In the same moment, the angels, those great witnesses of the soul's long journey through matter and time, see what this moment costs you. They are not without understanding of what it is to stand at the intersection of your own expansion and another's need for your containment. They carry the frequency of your exhaustion and your love and your determination in equal measure. They know that the easiest thing in the world right now would be to take a single step back into the familiar dark, to produce the old mask, from wherever you set it down, to put it on and watch the relief wash over your soulmate's face, to feel the temporary reprieve of their comfort, and mistake it for a sign that you did the right thing. They are holding this knowledge tenderly, because they do not judge you for the temptation. The temptation is a measure of your love and your sensitivity, and the depth of your empathetic nature. and these are among your most precious qualities. But they are also guiding you, with the steady, patient insistence of a hand on a shoulder, toward the understanding that the relief you would feel in that moment of retreat is not the relief of alignment. It is the relief of avoidance. It is the particular relief that comes from releasing the tension of becoming, which is always temporary, always followed by a deeper, more pervasive discomfort, the discomfort of a soul that knows it made a choice against itself. You have felt that discomfort before. You know its specific texture. It is duller than the sharp intensity of staying in your light. But it lasts infinitely longer, and it goes all the way down to the bone. Your soulmate is going to have to decide something. This is the truth that no amount of love on your part can change, and it is also the most important truth of this entire situation. They are going to have to decide whether they can love an infinite horizon. They are going to have to decide whether the love they have for you is large enough to expand, as you expand, whether it can grow beyond the initial dimensions that contained it into something with no fixed borders, and no ceiling, and no final resting point of complete comprehension. They are going to have to decide whether the madness of not being able to fully know you, of never being able to place the final pin in the butterfly's wings, of always being surprised by some new refraction of the crystal, is something they can learn to live in with joy, rather than with terror. This decision cannot be forced or hurried, or made for them. It can only be made from inside their own relationship with their own soul, in their own time, through their own process of expansion. What you can do is make sure that the version of you they are deciding about is the real one, not the accommodated one, not the diminished one, not the version that makes the decision easier by being smaller and less demanding and more predictable. The full, sovereign, radiant, multifaceted, ever-evolving you. Because if they decide to stay, based on anything less than the full truth of who you are, they are not actually deciding to stay for you. They are deciding to stay for a version of you that you are no longer willing or able to be. And that is not a foundation for a true partnership. That is a continuation of the same dynamic that brought you both to this crisis point. The invitation you are extending to your soulmate right now, silently, through the simple act of remaining in the fullness of your own being, is the most profound invitation one soul can extend to another. You are showing them that it is possible to shatter every comfortable box and survive the shattering. You are showing them that the person they thought they owned completely is actually a mystery, and that this is not a frightening thing, but the most alive and interesting and generative thing about a human being. You are showing them what it looks like to refuse the contraction, to choose the expansion, even when the expansion is terrifying, even when it costs relationships, even when the comfort of the smaller life is right there within reach, and so seductive in its familiarity. You are showing them a road and saying, with your posture and your eyes, and the quality of your presence rather than with words, that this road exists, and that it is survivable, and that what waits at the end of it is worth every uncomfortable step. If they are truly your soulmate, if the connection between you is the kind that was written into the architecture of existence before either of you took your first breath, then this invitation will eventually land in the place inside them that is already awake. It will find the part of them that signed the same contract your soul signed, the part that already knows that transformation is the whole point, and it will ignite something. The madness will begin to shift, the terror will begin to find its edges, and reveal itself as the entrance to something extraordinary, rather than the beginning of a permanent dissolution. Do not count the days of this process. Do not measure the progress of their expansion against a human timeline. Spiritual evolution does not operate according to the calendar you keep on your wall, and the expansion of a person's capacity to love the infinite in another is not a thing that can be scheduled or predicted or hurried. What you can do, the only thing that is actually within your power and your responsibility, is to keep stepping into the sun. Every morning, every moment of choice, every time the temptation to retreat presents itself as kindness or pragmatism or love, choose the light again. Let your essence continue to shift and glow, according to the rhythm of your own becoming, rather than the comfort level of anyone watching. Let the new faces you present to the world, the new depths they reveal, the new frequencies they broadcast, continue to emerge on the schedule of your own soul, rather than the schedule of another's readiness. This is not selfishness. This is the full expression of the purpose you were given before you came into this body. You are a being of celestial origin, moving through a human life, and the human life is asking you, moment by moment, to keep choosing the celestial. Keep choosing it. Keep letting the light do its work through you and on you and around you, and trust that the love that is real enough to last will find its way to match the brightness of what you are becoming. Trust that your soulmate, wrestling in the labyrinth of their own expanding mind, is finding their way to the door that opens onto a bigger sky. Trust that the madness is temporary, and the adoration is permanent, and the love, when it arrives at its full and true expression, will be something neither of you could have imagined when you began, something so large and so full and so genuinely free, that it makes the early love, beautiful as it was, look like a single candle in a field of every light that has ever burned. You are not too much. You have never been too much. You were simply too much for the containers that were available to you. Before you began the work of your own becoming, the container is growing now. Your soulmate's capacity to hold you is growing now, through pain and vertigo, and the particular holy madness of loving someone who refuses to stop ascending. The growth is real, and the love is real, and the light is real, and the angels watching over this exquisite, turbulent, irreversible unfolding are holding their breath with reverence for everything you have chosen, for everything you are continuing to choose, for every moment of courage it takes to stand in the brightest version of yourself. When the whole world, or at least the one person who matters most to you in it, is asking you with their eyes and their fear, and their beautiful breaking, expanding heart to please, just for a moment, step back into the familiar dark, stand in the sun, let the light find every facet, let the crystal turn, let every color you contain pour out into the air around you, and fall on everyone watching, including the one who is going quietly, magnificently, necessarily mad, with the impossible beauty of learning to love the infinite soul that you have always been.